I'm Katya,
And I'm Rin,
and we're here at the Commonwealth Center for Holistic Herbalism in Boston, Massachusetts.
and we're excited to share this replay of this week's live Herbal Q&A session with you.
These live sessions are part of our herbal learning program, and you can find out more about that at commonwealthherbs.com/learn.
Check it out. But before we begin, we just wanted to remind you that we are not doctors. We are herbalists, and we're holistic health educators.
The ideas discussed on this video do not constitute medical advice. No state or federal authority licenses herbalists in the United States, so these discussions are for educational purposes only. Everybody's body is different, so the things that we're talking about may or may not apply directly to you, but hopefully they'll give you some more information to think about and to go research more.
We just want to remind you that good health is your own personal responsibility, and that the final decision when considering any course of therapy, whether it's discussed on the internet or prescribed by a physician, is actually always yours.
So don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to send us any questions at info@commonwealthherbs.com, and enjoy the replay.
Okay, well, welcome to Q&A. If you've been around, then you know what to do. And if you're new here, if this is your first time at Q&A, then welcome. We are delighted to have new people.
Yay!
Q&A, you can ask your questions in a couple of ways. One is to use the chat window. If you don't see a chat window, wiggle your cursor around on the screen until some options turn up at the bottom in a little panel, and one of them will be a chat bubble, and that means chat. So you can use that. You can type your questions right into there, and we will answer them as they come in, more or less, depending on whether a follow-up is relevant to a thing. And
sometimes there's groups of questions, whatever.
At our executive discretion.
We'll get them almost in the order they come in.
Yeah, more or less. Otherwise, you can wait for an opportune pause, and you can unmute yourself and speak with your voice through the ether, and it will reverberate into our brains.
And if there are no opportune pauses, just interrupt. That's totally fine.
That's fine too.
Yeah, we love to hear your voices, so ask your question in whatever way is most comfortable for you and most appropriate for the noise level of the place you're in. Well, let's kick it off with a question from Sochi. I've started sharing with my 78-year-old mother ginkgo and rosemary tea to improve cognitive function. I have two questions. Is there any real difference between green ginkgo herb and the yellow fall ginkgo herb? And the second question, when working with rosemary specifically to inhale its volatile oils while steeping, do you prefer fresh or dried plants, or is there much of a difference? Let's go backwards. I prefer dried. If it's really good quality dried, I prefer the dried because the volatile oil content is actually higher in very good quality dried plant than it is in fresh plant. And I suppose if we were to examine one dry leaf and one fresh leaf, that might not be true. But in terms of like what you throw in, if you're throwing into the pot or to the cup fresh rosemary, you need a lot more. But if you're putting in dried rosemary, it already is a lot more because it's dried, so it's smaller. So I typically prefer to work with dried, and also fresh has a very short life. So unless you are able to just keep a live plant right there, which is fantastic and definitely worth doing, but you're not always able to keep enough live plant matter around to serve your needs. So for that reason also, I prefer dried.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. And then about the ginkgo. Yeah, so the idea there is that there's either better availability or maybe greater expression of some of the supposedly active constituents in ginkgo. Come back to that in a minute. In ginkgo, in the yellow leaves in the autumn. So before they fall, but after they've already turned their color. I haven't actually gotten or taken, let's say, the opportunity to dig into that in too much depth. All I can say is that enough people believe it that Mountain Rose will sell you autumn gold ginkgo leaf, and beyond that, I'm really not sure, to be perfectly honest.
But actually, I was having a conversation with a woman who wrote with questions today, right around that if enough people believe it thing. And I think that it's really important to recognize that although it might not be the case right here, that there are buckets of urban legends. And I mean that urban like HERBAN legends. And so just because enough people are interested that it's for sale does not necessarily mean that it's accurate. Yeah.
I think it's very likely to be something, but I am not yet clear on to what degree it is a thing, or
how relevant that is,
how much that thing will color our work with the plant itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry not to be more definitive there, but that's where we're at.
Okay, Michelle asks about red raspberry in pregnancy. Yes, do it. Raspberry leaf is nourishing, it is toning, and that is the only time that you might not want to work with red raspberry. Pregnancy has nothing to do with it. It's completely safe in pregnancy. It's food. It's like nettle leaf. But the time that you might not want to is if the pregnant person that you're working with is very, very dry and has a lot of tension. In that case, and that's unusual in pregnancy. Like pregnancy, you kind of get
there are like moistening and loosening
yes
influences.
Yes, there's a lot of that going on in pregnancy. Yeah. So even a person who constitutionally and usually in life is dry and tense, in pregnancy they may not find that. And everything is kind of getting very loose, and that's a little bit uncomfortable. So having something to kind of give you a little support in that is also very lovely. So yes, and then the other thing here is that so many people now are more sedentary than humans should be, and probably more sedentary than they themselves want to be also.
Well, yeah, right.
And that leads to stagnation and lack of strength in the uterus itself. And so having an herb that can contribute just a little, like, see, I'm sort of slouchy here, and then just a little good posture to your uterus. And that's a little bit of a metaphor, but like just to keep everything with its appropriate amount of tension, not too tight, not too loose. It just helps the whole thing be more comfortable, be easier. When it comes time to go through contractions, they will be more effective, more efficient. Your labor may not last as long. It's hard to know because you don't know how long your labor would have been without it. But
yeah, you need to get your multiverse window
right, exactly.
Ready so you can like check what would have happened if I, you know.
Yeah. And then somebody asked if that's the same for black raspberry. Yes, this is true for raspberry, for blackberry, for black raspberry. But also nettle and dandelion have actions in this regard too. I see the conversation going on the side about everybody saying that fall ginkgo is not a delicious flavor.
That's a good.
Yeah.
I believe that based on the smell of crushed ginkgo fruits.
Yes, they're not delicious.
Super exciting.
They're not delicious.
This one.
Okay.
Any other suggestions for improving cognitive function in elders? So, yeah, for sure. You will be not at all surprised to hear us advocate for movement.
Hey, that's what I was going to say.
For physical exercise. So, you know, there's been a lot of interest over the last bunch of whiles in brain training, right? And there are like apps you can get and websites that you can play on and all kinds of things. And it's like, this is a brain training game, right? And that's better than just a crossword because of reasons that we have and we'll tell you about.
Because of marketing.
Yeah. Well, don't give it away. Right. Okay. So brain training, it's cool, right? It's good to play games. It's good to stretch your capabilities. It's a great idea for everybody to, I think, to try to learn some new languages, basically for all of your entire life.
Yeah. This thing about you can only learn languages when you're a kid. like, yes, okay, there is a cognitive thing that makes it a little easier when you're a kid. Learn languages all the time. Go bananas.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's definitely something to be said for like entertaining the mind and
Mm-hmm.
engaging the mind and doing that and trying to find ways to be less passive about what we do with our brains.
Yes. Critical thinking is a discipline.
Yeah.
It is an exercise.
Right.
And it is something that we have a tendency as we get older to decide as humans that, oh, now we know things.
Yeah.
And, oh, the wisdom of age. And just don't let that happen. Just decide that you don't know things and that you need to continue to think critically all of the time. It's a thing.
Yeah. We can all be like Socrates. That was this whole thing, you know. Was people keep telling me I'm smart, but I don't know why. So I'm just gonna bug everybody with really annoying questions all day until I get some answers. That's how to be Socrates. Okay, but my point here actually was that brain training is cool and exciting, but there have been some studies that have looked at improvements in cognitive function, blood flow to the brain, and a number of other kinds of either physical or like mental or performance markers of brain function and cognitive health. And you can improve them just as much by physically moving your body if you do it in the right environment. So standing on a treadmill, watching TV and walking for a half an hour is better than not walking, like sitting on the couch and watching TV, but it's not anywhere near as good as going outside and walking around in the real world. Your brain responds to it really differently. When you're out there moving through space, you're moving through mental space as well, and especially if we start to move in ways that are a little bit different, like if we walk off trail, if we go on terrain that's a little bit more complex, if we maybe crawl a little bit every now and then, right? If we start to engage with our environment in a different way, that also stimulates the brain. And so there's a lot of space to cross over between physical training or physical exercise and mental training, mental exercise. And so we often want our elders to get both of these things, and if they can come together in one handy little nature-shaped package, then that's even better, right? So this is a long-winded way of advocating for lots of walks outside, lots of different ways to move naturally in natural environments as probably the like cover as many bases at once as possible option for keeping your body and your mind strong long-term.
The other wonderful thing about that is most of our elders are taking multiple pharmaceuticals, and the more pharmaceuticals that you have in the picture, the more complicated it is to work with herbs. But taking a walk outside does not have any drug interactions. So, so that's really good. So much of the way that we work is to look at how did humans solve this problem in the past, or what created this problem as we moved into modern times. And if we look at very, very old people who are still healthy, you know, who are still moving around, doing other things, their mind is quick, all this stuff. These are people who just didn't stop. Right. They might be moving slower now than they did in the past, but they're still out there tending their garden, or, you know, like mowing the lawn or doing home repairs or whatever it is. They're still doing those things, and they're still active with their minds too. They're volunteering in the community. They didn't just retire and land on the couch in front of the television.
Right. I guess one thing that occurs to me here is that so often the problems that we identify as like a loss of cognitive function, a loss of sharpness, a loss of mental acuity, they're all in the general pattern of sluggishness, of like cold, of weight, of too much like heaviness, or too much bogging you up internally and slowing things down. So, you know, when we look at the herbs that are most famous for improving mental function, they're stimulating, right? You've got your ginkgo, and it's going to move the blood all around and get things circulating. Rosemary in a similar way. Tulsi in a similar way. Right?
Even ginger.
Ginger, absolutely.
Yeah, like a really basic one.
Yeah. So we've got like aromatic herbs and circulatory stimulant herbs and herbs that bring movement into the body. And so again, that kind of goes directly with what we're saying, is like you can have the herbs that support that if you are also physically moving and pumping your blood and moving your muscles around in new and novel configurations, then that's going to enhance that even more so, and they're going to work together in a really nice way. So,
You know, there's one other thing I want to suggest on this, and that is a very lovely book by Katie Bowman called Dynamic Aging.
absolutely.
And this book is thoughtful in every way. It's talking about, and she co-wrote the book with a group of 5 or 6 septuagenarians and octogenarians who were making big changes in their lives and discovering that in fact they could learn to hang on the monkey bars again like they did when they were children, even though they had not been able to do that through their middle adulthood.
Right.
But they were learning it again in their 70s and 80s, and learning to do things that they didn't think were possible anymore in their 70s and 80s. And the book is really laid out very nicely, and even it's in large print, so it's just very, it's thoughtful in its accessibility in every way. And I find it very inspiring because it really, you know, nobody says, well, fine, I'm just going to retire and sit on my butt and let myself deteriorate, right? That's not what's going on. People say, oh my goodness, my life has been really hard and I'm exhausted and I'm so grateful that I'm retired and now I can just rest for a minute. And you know, we sit still sometimes because we are tired, and that's fair, that's appropriate. So I really like this particular book because it starts super easy. I mean, like, even for a person for whom standing can present balance issues, like, it starts really that easy and you build up super slow.
Right.
And there's no, you know, like, our culture promotes stagnation and our culture promotes sedentism. So if you fell into that pattern, there's no shame there. It's just, that's the culture that we live in. And what we need to do is just change it, but we don't have to feel bad about it. And so I really like her approach because it's very positive and very inspiring.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely on board with rosemary, and somebody was recommending have it as a room spray and get that scent in there. We have some really lovely Tulsi incense that gets those aromatics going. Drinking a lot of Tulsi is a great idea for basically everyone, but hey, elders even more so, right? We can see a lot of situations where that would match up what's going on and what we're trying to emphasize and stave off. So absolutely those herbs matter a ton, but just really wanted to put in a solid plug here for movement, and especially movement that's always kind of stretching your capacity a little bit. Whether that's a small, tiny movement like ramping your head back instead of turtlenecking forward all the time, right? That can make a huge difference in blood flow to the brain, believe it or not.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, seriously.
Yeah, no kidding. But I mean, like, micro adjustments like that, or, you know, let's get you to a place where you can walk 5 miles in a day, no problem, right? Yeah, makes a huge, huge difference there. Don't go without it.
All right, April is asking about low blood pressure and saying, my thoughts are hawthorn, nettle, St. John's wort, and supercharged bone broth. Anything else? And actually, my thought is, don't have those thoughts. Those are not the first thoughts to have. Those are thoughts to have further down the road. So whenever you are looking at a particular situation, your first thought is, what's really going on here? Why are we saying low blood pressure? And even just that, there are really divergent things that we call low blood pressure. On one hand, it could be something that, like, actually it is, you can measure it, the blood pressure is in fact low. And on the other hand, it can just be like, they were told that a certain set of symptoms, like feeling dizzy when you stand up, is related to low blood pressure. So they assume that because they have those symptoms, they must have low blood pressure. And they're using that phrase as like a shorthand to describe their symptoms. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's still a different situation. So the first thing is to figure out what's really going on. Because if a person feels dizzy when they stand up, that does not have to have anything to do with blood pressure, actually. There are many reasons that that can happen. So first we figure out what's actually going on. The second thing we need to know is, are there any medications involved? Because if this is actually diagnosed, measurable low blood pressure, there might be medications. But even if it isn't, there still might be medications involved. So that's really important to know about. And then after that, we need to think about, well, how did you get here? Like when did this start? What was going on? How did we get to this situation? And it's not until after we have all of those answers that we're even going to start to think about plants. So you ready?
I didn't see any new feedback there.
So I would say that hawthorn is one that you might be very hesitant to put onto the list, because if the person is taking medication, I mean, they could have low blood pressure because they had high blood pressure and now they're taking medication and it's a little too much and now the blood pressure is low. We just don't know anything about this situation. And hawthorn can interact with some of the blood pressure medications. There is that possibility there. So maybe we leave that one out. In general, you can not really ever hurt anybody with nettle unless they're taking blood thinners. So nettle is not necessarily going to raise blood pressure, but it is nutritive and it's got great mineral content, and that might be helpful for them overall. We don't know, but it can be beneficial for lots of people. And again, St. John's wort, we don't know because we don't know if this person's taking any medications. So that would not be safe if there were medications involved. And then you mentioned supercharged bone broth. Holy cow, there's never anything wrong with that. And anytime that we can work with food, that's the best, because that is the safest baseline. So that would be the way that I would approach this issue.
Yeah. Yeah, low blood pressure is an interesting situation because it's not so, I guess, maybe as simple or as direct in a lot of cases as the high blood pressure, because with high blood pressure, you're like, okay, so things are too tense, there's too much fluid in the system, we can drain, we can relax, it's all pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. Low blood pressure is a little bit stranger in some ways.
Yeah, I feel also that, and April updated, that it is diagnosed low blood pressure and there are no medications, but this is a very interesting thing and it plays into what I was just gonna bring in. I'm guessing that it has something to do with not being able to absorb iron very well. So that is really, really interesting, especially because the next thing I was gonna say is that often when there are actually any kind of problem, I was gonna say cardiovascular problems, but actually any kind of problem, the first place that I really wanna look is at the person's diet. Because when the body breaks down, the first thing I need to think about is there even enough gas in the tank? Or is the body getting what it needs just to function appropriately at all? And a lot of times that is a big factor in low blood pressure issues, but especially if you're mentioning that you're having trouble absorbing iron, that very strongly correlates to a food sensitivity that maybe hasn't been cleared out yet. So this is a really good time if you've never done a Whole30. This is a great time to try one. You know, it's hard to change our food because we are in habits and habits are comfortable. And we're busy and it's hard to try something new, but it's really healthy to just change things up. Even if you're not going to give up gluten for your whole life or whatever, it's normal throughout the course of all of human history to go through cycles with food and have different things available at different times. So it's great to have that experience of just changing things completely, just for the experience of it, just to say, wow, so this is how my body feels when I'm not eating any sugar at all, or when I'm not eating any grains at all, or any dairy or whatever. This is how my body feels when I remove all the things that are potentially inflammatory. So yeah, so that's a really important thing to think about. And undiagnosed or undiscovered food sensitivities play a huge role in absorption difficulties. So since that's a factor here, then even doubly so, this would be a great time to try that. And then you might want to add a gut heal tea into the situation too, just because if there are any undiagnosed food sensitivities going on, then there's like damage in the gut that can be healed up by that. And the gut heal tea recipe is in the digestive health course, or you can also find it on the website. Okay.
All right, so there's a discussion that's been happening in the meantime over here.
Yeah, it's really lovely.
Started with Jennifer asking about a very dry friend who lives in Arizona and asked for an herbal tea for self-worth. Okay.
Beautiful.
And then Catherine asked if they're taking any pharmaceuticals and if they tend to hot or cold. Good questions. Jennifer responded, tends toward cold, not any pharmaceuticals we know of. So we've got cold, we've got dry, we've got no drugs in the mix right now. Jennifer's thinking about Tulsi but wants to offer something else. George is recommending linden because it's moistening and goes nice with Tulsi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Catherine agrees with Georgia on the linden and the Tulsi and is also saying maybe some rose hips. And if they're struggling with boundaries and saying no, some motherwort. I also like the idea of hawthorn. Jennifer mentions, I think she has more trouble letting people in with boundaries. So maybe the linden and the Tulsi would be softening, uplifting, and maybe some marshmallow. That's a lovely idea. You know, if she has trouble letting people in, somebody may have already suggested this as we're scrolling down, but why not add a little bit of yarrow to that? Yarrow it's like armor. It's like emotional armor, right? And I mean, there's a lot of physiological good stuff going on, but emotionally, there's this aspect of protection that comes along with it. And sometimes it's a little bit easier to let people in if you feel like you are carrying around your own protection, you're safe. We hold people out when we don't feel safe. So having a plant that can help lend that feeling of safety can be really nice. In fact, we have yarrow in tonight's tea, actually.
Yeah, I can taste it. I like it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Brianne adds in that hawthorn's helpful, balancing with the boundaries and the self-worth helps you to open your heart in a healthy way. Yeah, we find that too with rose. When we work with rose petals, we find an aspect of that same kind of quality going on. I see Catherine's thinking about shatavari for moistening and softening and opening. And somebody had mentioned marshmallow previously for that too. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, lovely.
Cool. Well, great.
You guys have beautiful ideas. I really like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all sound good to me. Okay, so let's see, where were we? Here's a question. Yes. From Shelley. My father just started taking Flomax, aka Tamulocin. Can he take saw palmetto and nettle root capsules concurrently with Flomax? Have you heard anything about that? He feels more comfortable taking both the herbs and the pharmaceuticals.
Like physically in his body, that feels more comfortable?
He is dry and tense and cold. So my other question is, should I suggest saw palmetto, as I'm guessing the nettle might be too drying? Okay.
I mean, saw palmetto is pretty astringent. And unless you're eating the berries themselves, like the berries themselves are fatty and also pretty gross. And so they're not so drying because they come along with their own oiliness, but taking it in a capsule, I'm not sure that you really benefit a lot from that aspect. And I think you're really left with mostly the astringent aspect.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. They're both going to have some drying effects. The nettle for sure, but I think that we're going to want to compensate for that elsewhere in the day. And so what I might advise would be that they take those as capsule form or like a supplement, but be drinking some marshmallow infusion or marshmallow leaf tea or something nice like this through the day to maintain that proper moisture balance in the body.
I myself don't feel awesome about the concurrent aspect of this. I think I would prefer to go with one or the other, but this is a place where we can get the person's doctor in on the situation. I mean, we always can do that, but we can do it very effectively here because there is so much research on nettle and nettle root and saw palmetto, that the likelihood that the doctor is not familiar with these two herbs is very, very small. And so I think that this would be one of those cases where I would definitely just have an open conversation with the doctor and say, you know, hey, these are over-the-counter supplements. I've brought them in. I tried them, and honestly, it feels more comfortable in my body when I take them along with the prescription. And I want to talk to you about that and make sure that you feel okay, and am I not like making the situation too strong? Because you could end up with just like a little too much astringency going on. And so it might be nice to, even if the doctor says, you know, I feel fine with that, to just set in an intention that once a week or once every 2 weeks you reevaluate and make sure that it still feels comfortable, because you can get dried out. That can creep in slowly and you maybe don't realize it until suddenly you are just super dry. So so talk to the doctor, see what he or she feels, and then also really have that plan to check in regularly and make sure that it still feels good.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and I mean, the
Sounds
doctor,
good. Yeah.
herbs in terms of astringency, they'll be thinking more on the kind of pharmacological aspects and the influences nettle and saw palmetto might have on testosterone balance and, you know, metabolism inside the body and that kind of thing. I think it's very unlikely that they would steer you away from it. This is a very common situation for people to be taking all of these, a bunch of other stuff at the same time. I'm not particularly worried about any problems, but I do think proceeding slowly and with some care is always a good idea.
Yeah. Good. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Catherine had a quick one about the parasite workshop with Phyllis Light. So this is a live course, a live workshop that's going to happen on February 29th. And it'll be from 1 o'clock until probably about 5 o'clock Eastern time. Registration will be open right up until the last minute. I guess for marketing purposes, I'm supposed to tell you, register now, don't wait, but like whatever, you can register at the last minute, it'll be fine. And we don't currently have a head count cap. But if it looks like it's gotten too big and I think that it will no longer be conversationally appropriate, then I will say we're full.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that workshop because there's so much misinformation about parasites, and Phyllis Light lives in Alabama. She's been practicing for like 40 years. And she's dealt with actual, real, honest to goodness parasites throughout her whole practice. So, and she has a lot of medical knowledge as well as herbal knowledge, so she can speak really intelligently about both sides of, yeah, it's great. I'm very excited about it.
Okay, well, Sweet asked, I received a lot of dried aloe leaf and I'm not sure how to enjoy it. Any ideas? I have never worked with dried aloe leaf.
We're not huge fans of aloe, which doesn't mean that it's not good or that it's harmful or anything. It's just not something that we're into.
It's just one of those plants that hasn't been in our practice. Like we had a plant around for a little while.
We did for a minute.
Put it on some minor burns once or twice. Okay, that was
yeah.
fine. But it's just, I haven't gotten into it.
Yeah. I don't love it internally as a philosophy. Some people really do. So anyway, no, we don't have any ideas at all.
Yeah, because it's, I mean, we can say that proceed with some caution if you've never worked with it before, because especially if you're drinking it or taking it internally, it's very likely to have a pronounced laxative effect that could be extremely intense if you take a lot. So if you do decide to ingest it, then start small and go slow.
Yes.
Do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sochi said, oh, I wondered why you seem to prefer rose water over aloe for sunburns. Actually, there's another reason, is that, I mean, rose water is amazing. and aloe is slimy. But aloe feeds a staph infection. So if you are working with someone who could have a staph infection or could be in a place that they could be exposed to one, then like just like the current habit of putting aloe on everything isn't awesome, because more and more people are having staph infections. So yeah,
we got that. So TJ was asking, any suggestions for dried St. John's wort and dried arnica? I planned to make a trauma oil with them and calendula before listening to the medicine making class about the infused oils. Then I realized I needed some fresh St. John's wort for making an infused oil. Okay.
You know, that dried St. John's wort, it won't help you for oil, but it is amazing for making tea. And if you're not taking pharmaceuticals, I gotta tell you, it's one of my favorite teas. It is a little bitter, but it's a very familiar bitter. It's very similar to black tea. And so it's a flavor that is not like, it's not like jumping into bitter with blue vervain or artichoke leaf or something like that. And it's really, honestly, it's one of my favorite herbs for like detoxing sugar. Not that that's exactly quite the right way to say it, but if you're just like, I have been eating a lot of sugar and I just need to like clear it out of my body and just not be full of sugar all of the time for a few minutes, then St. John's wort is awesome for that. Or if you are going to be full of sugar, then it's my favorite tea to drink with cake, because the damage that's happening from the cake is also being like mitigated from the St. John's wort. So I do find it a really important tea to have on hand. Yes. The arnica, we don't work with arnica. Don't drink it as tea.
Yeah. Although I will say that one, it does seem like calendula to be one that you can successfully infuse into oil when you're starting with dried material. So
maybe you could tincture it too.
Yeah, you could tincture it. You could infuse it into oil, but either way, what I would end up with that would be a kind of a liniment, something that's going to be designed or intended for application shortly after an injury, a sprain, a strain, some kind of irritation like that. And then you apply it on there, and it's designed or intended to help to bring blood and to bring fresh fluid to the area so that things can heal and can recover. It would make sense to put that in together with some calendula, together with some cayenne, some ginger, things like that that have similar actions and are all kind of pointing in that same direction. So that you could do. And again, you could tincture it and do it the same way, but stick with that for topical use or topical application. And yeah, you can put it on bruises, you can put it on muscle strains. Yep, no problem. But you're not going to want to take anything more than a few drops of arnica tincture internally. There are occasionally reasons to take a few drops of it, but if you go too much higher than that, you're going to be very likely to irritate your GI tract. So let's not do that. Yeah. Topical stuff with arnica, best way to go.
Just scrolling through. I just love how many conversations you guys are having in here. I love seeing all the things that you're learning. Kayla asked about herbs and best practices for cognition and mental function for aging people, and I think we covered a lot of that.
I guess one thing that we didn't really talk about as much was in the realm of neuroprotective habits and foods and herbs as well, right? So this can be relevant. We could spend a moment there. Probably the first thing I would look at would be the balance and the type of fats and oils in the person's diet. It's not at all uncommon. And here you have to think, you have to go back to that central, like, put it on a bumper sticker and give it to everybody thing. You're not what you eat, you're what you digest. And this matters a lot for elders. Because in general, your digestive fire tends to decline as you age. And especially proteins and fats can become more difficult to digest. People might be less inclined to eat them, or they might be eating them, but not really digesting them and not really getting them into the body where they can actually be of use to you. So we are going to be paying attention to the kind of fats and oils the person is ingesting, and then giving them bitters, giving them sage, giving them fennel, giving them herbs that can help them to digest and utilize those more efficiently. When we talk about fats, same basic stuff as always. You want to be avoiding your industrial seed oils, corn and soy and canola and cottonseed and quote unquote vegetable, and emphasizing fats from healthy animals like lard and tallow and ghee, and also olive oil and coconut oil and things like this. And especially when we're thinking about protecting the nerves, we're thinking about the omega-3 fatty acids, especially EPA and DHA. So we're looking at animal sources of omega-3s here. We're looking at sardines and herring and small fatty fishes and wild-caught salmon and grass-fed cow liver and all that other great stuff that everybody loves and has a lot of in their diet, I hope, right? Because it can really matter. And start now so that you still have a brain at the end of your life.
Start now.
You know,
part of the issue with our aging parents right now is that they are in the worst possible situation because they, like, as we look at the boomers, they were the first generation to really have a lot of modern foods available to them, and the first generation to really stop eating all of our traditional foods. They're the first generation who had like TV dinners and industrialized foods and a lot of margarine and Crisco instead of lard and butter. And this was the first generation that really had a lot of sugar, not a little sugar, but a lot of sugar. And the first generation that really grew up with no wild foods. A lot less fish, a lot less vegetables, and the vegetables they got were like canned. So we're looking at the reason that we see so many of these geriatric problems in this generation is that they had a whole lifetime of not, like, their body's not really getting what they needed, and so they had to compensate throughout their whole life, and now they don't have anything left to compensate with.
Right.
And so so on one hand, that's a bummer and that's hard to work with, but on the other hand, it's not impossible to build back. What we want to look at is, like, really just all those things that they didn't have over their whole lives. Let's build it in there now. That might be hard because they might not want to eat sardines because they didn't grow up with that. It doesn't taste like food to them. But just like with kids, there are ways to make food adventurous and exciting. And so we, you know, especially if you are caring for your elderly parents in your home and you're providing food for them and stuff, then sort of thinking about it the same way that you would get a kid excited about a new food can be a way to be creative in that problem solving.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously, as we're thinking about what happened for that generation and how they got where they are now, we can also think about ourselves. And how did we grow up? I did not grow up with sardines. I grew up, my definition of fish was Long John Silver's, or the fish sticks in the box with the guy in the raincoat. Like that's what I thought fish was. If it didn't come with a hush puppy, it wasn't fish. And
the guy in the raincoat.
The guy in the raincoat.
It's the Gordon's fisherman from
I know, from Gloucester, but I grew up in Texas, so I didn't know. But you know, and we didn't have a ton of vegetables growing up. We had like frozen peas and carrots and iceberg lettuce and a lot of sugar. So there is so much that we as millennials and Gen Xers and well, any of us really, if you're thinking in this way, it doesn't actually matter how old you are. It's not too late to change. It's not too late to start giving your body what it needs. I mean, good heavens, your body is keeping you alive, even in spite of all of the pesticides and all of the xenoestrogens and all of the cake and all of the everything else. And your body is like, I'm here for you. I'm going to keep going. And so it's never too late to give your body some support. And the sooner that we start, then the less likely that we are to have those geriatric problems. And I saw that if you go up, I think it was Tish who was talking about, yeah, it was Trish talking about being a personal trainer and working with older people right now and their injuries, and also iatrogenic problems that create maybe not injuries but limitations.
That means things caused by the drugs. You got side effects, but we ferociously argue against the existence of such a thing as a side effect.
Yeah,
There's
it's
only effects, and some of them we like, and that's what we put on the front, and some of them we don't like, and we put them in tiny little letters on the back. But it's just what happens when you take that thing. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the injury stuff is real, right? And a lot of the same things we're talking about could be relevant there too. To say that all disease begins in the gut, thank you, Hippocrates, is maybe not entirely accurate, but it's also not a bad way to arrange your practice or to approach lots of different problems, including ones where you look at it and you're like, oh, it's a joint problem. We've got to take something for the joints. We've got to give you something for the joints. And that can be a helpful focus, and we can think about Solomon's seal, and we can think about, about cat's claw, and we can think about knotweed, and those are all helpful and relevant there. And especially for athletes of any age who are having crackly joints and clicky knees and all of that, those herbs are worth considering. But we also need to think about like basic digestive stuff, right? Are you absorbing the nutrients from your meals? Are you having some bone broth every now and then? And when you eat it, are you able to actually absorb the collagen and the glycine and all of that other good stuff and have that go to work inside of your body in the way that we want? So I would turn back again to looking at digestive health and about herbs like fennel, like sage, like ginger, that can improve digestive function, and particularly about absorption and utilization of fats in the body. That can be really, really critical, even to joint health, just in terms of lubrication around the area.
As we're scrolling down, Catherine was sharing an herbal hot cocoa recipe, which, by the way, Catherine, you can toss in the discussion thread in the medicine making course in the hot cocoa recipes, because this recipe looks amazing. Unsweetened cacao, coconut cream powder, vanilla extract, powdered rose petals, and shatavari. That looks delicious. I would probably put an ashwagandha, but that's because I live in damp New England in a damp body. So that is really great though, because we can take that same recipe and just by changing one herb, we're making a big difference in its effect constitutionally. But that looks so delicious.
We had been talking about movement a moment ago, and there's a question here. Can we discuss different herbal allies to help your yoga practice? For sure. And especially because I think about the people who have the most trouble with something like that, right? So they go in and they're like, yeah, I want to do yoga. I heard it was good for you. And then, I'll just be in my own body, and like you go in there and you're a guy and you're not entirely sure if this class is for you, or you're all the way welcome, and like, where am I supposed to stand, and what happens next? And, and then you feel a little tight, especially around the hips maybe, and you're like, oh, I'm not really in that shape. Am I doing this right? And you're not entirely sure. So there are elements of the physical body and the mental body that we need to think about here to help people really enjoy their practice. So I don't think there's anything to speak against taking some relaxant herbs before you go to yoga. Now, if it's the kind of yoga that's going to be demanding a lot of feats of strength from you, and you're going to do some handstands and everything, this may not be the most relevant idea. You might choose instead to work with pine or cedar instead, because that's like fortifying and gives you some power. But if you're going to go in and it's going to be like a lot of long stretches and holds and things, then plants like Solomon's seal, plants like kava could make a lot of sense to get you into that space, get you into that mental and physical space where you're ready to stretch and to lengthen and to go deep and to be patient. So yeah, I would start with maybe just those two. Experiment with Solomon's seal for that loosening effect. Experiment with kava for that relaxant to muscular tension effect. What I like about kava is that it doesn't make your mind dull or even necessarily wandery. It's a very good herb for when you want to stay present and stay focused with some low intensity but high attention movement. And that sounds like a yoga class to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm just thrilled with all these conversations. let me go back up here. A lot of you guys are talking about cake and St. John's wort, and you know, I mean, I love cake too, and I think it's really important that I emphasize to you guys that I love cake. My cake is gluten-free and dairy-free because there are some lines I won't cross, but that doesn't mean that it's not cake. And so often people in our position are like made into gurus and like, oh, well, they must do everything perfectly, and they wear all the white yoga clothes and they do all the whatever, and their lives are perfect and nothing, they're never stressed out and whatever. And that's just not true. And I don't want to present us that way at all. Students used to say, oh, well, I guess it's gluten-free and dairy-free is fine for you, but I could never do that. You guys, I also could never do that, but I did. And I still eat cake.
And you drink your tea every day.
And so that's the thing, is I want you to know that you do not have to only eat salmon and kale to be healthy, and you don't have to be perfect to be good enough. You're never not going to die. You're never not going to suffer. You're never not going to be sick. These things are part of being human. And so what we are trying to get to here is, how can I be the most comfortable? And the reality in my life, especially right now, is that the definition of comfortable involves a sliding scale of cake. And some days it involves no cake and only fish and sweet potatoes and like whatever. And some days it involves quite a bit of cake. And that is a reality in the level of stress that we have in our lives right now. And the fact that we all were raised with comfort foods, that's cultural here. And it might be cultural everywhere, but we have infinite access to them these days. And so knowing that there's a plant out there like St. John's wort who can help you like mitigate the damage, then just eat your double chocolate cake that you got at Costco tonight when you were shopping because you were hungry when you were there. Like, don't even feel bad about it. Just eat it and feel grateful, like feel excited, feel like, oh, this is cake. This is great. And don't be telling yourself, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad when you eat it. Instead, be like, this is delicious. I really love it. And maybe I don't need to do this again for a month, but it's delicious along with my St. John's wort tea. I just think that's a much healthier outlook, and you just don't have to never eat cake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, that goes along with that whole discussion you guys were having in there about the cake at Costco and St. John's wort.
Yeah. Michelle was asking about the monographs, the herb profiles we have in the Materia Medica course.
Mm-hmm.
Are the constituents here listed in any particular order, like quantity in the herb or anything like that? They are very roughly and somewhat inconsistently listed in ascending order of molecule size. So, which
is relevant, actually, like super relevant.
So I usually tried to list the light small molecules like volatile aromatic terpenes and things first. Sometimes as a group, like it has volatiles, it has this volatile and that one, limonene and pinene and thymol and whatever. And then to kind of like go along and to have larger and larger and more complex molecules until you end up with something like tannins or immunomodulating polysaccharides or whatever else. But that was only sort of a rough idea that I held in my head while I was putting them in there, and it is not strict or super specific. So please don't look for all of the exceptions that definitely exist.
The reason that that's relevant, though, is that if you are doing some research and you come across a particular constituent, I am thinking about rosmarinic acid, for example, because you will see that rosmarinic acid, which is in rosemary and some other plants, and that it's so helpful for cancer, or it won't be written that way. It'll be written in a way that I wouldn't want to say, whatever, like,
rosmarinic acid treats cancers.
Yes, that's how it'll be written.
It's going to cure your, whatever.
And so then the next thing that happens is that you'll get people who will try to sell you rosemary essential oil for your cancer. And it's really important to recognize that rosmarinic acid does have effects against tumors. And it is not in essential oil because the molecule is too heavy. It does not evaporate. So you could have all the rosemary essential oil in the world and it would not matter because there's no rosmarinic acid in there. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other things in rosemary essential oil that might be beneficial. And I don't want to reduce everything down to one constituent. But when you are doing research on a particular constituent that has been studied, and then you hear like, oh, I'm drinking a bunch of rosemary essential oil so I don't get cancer. First off, don't drink essential oils. But secondly, the solution to that is, wait a minute, the constituents that they've studied against tumors aren't even present in the essential oils. You have to work with the whole plant. So
Yeah.
that's why it's
Yeah.
but go ahead.
I had been reading monographs by other herbalists as well, and wondering if maybe it's commonplace to order these constituents in the way they're written, either based upon how significant they are in the herbal world, or like you guys are explaining now, that's helpful to know molecule size as well. I hadn't thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I would group them by category or something.
Yeah,
I don't think there is any
it's just standardized
standard for that.
Okay.
But if you ever need to know, if you're wondering, like, is this something that I need to decoct, or will it like short infuse, or is it a volatile oil or whatever, and you're just looking at a particular constituent name, you can Google the name of the constituent and then type in molecular weight.
yeah.
And if it is more than 350,
Somewhere around there, yeah.
yeah, if it's more than 350, it will not evaporate. It is not a volatile oil, so it will never be in an essential oil. And then from 350 on can tell you, like, is this like, oh, it's probably something that's going to come out in a short infusion, or I'm going to have to cook the heck out of this to get it.
Right. This is something I'm going to need to practice with a little bit more, the molecular weight aspect. And I started writing my own monographs because it's one thing for me to read and understand someone else's, but it's an entirely new concept for me to gather all of those ideas into one place that is, you know, you learn more when you write it yourself, right?
Yes.
So yeah,
I'm so excited you're doing that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Nice.
Excellent.
All right, maybe one more quick one. Jennifer was asking about working with salves made with animal fats, like beef tallow, or with lard or other things like that. And I think a couple of people weighed in here about trying that once or twice. But yeah, it's a great way to go.
It's actually better.
Yeah, they work really, really well, and those oils seem to be very, very happily absorbed by the skin, which is kind of nice. They feel quite oily. They feel like it's going to hang around and like be on your surface for a long time. But compared to something like olive oil or like castor oil or whatever, the animal oil salves, they do really seem to absorb a lot more readily into the tissue.
They're more similar to the oils that we make ourselves. And also they are more traditional. The whole thing with olive oil as a standard is extremely new.
Yeah.
And it came in because when herbalism was you know, revitalizing in this country, a lot of them were hippie flower children, you know, they're self-described that way, and they were vegetarians. And so they were all about like the olive oil, and they didn't want to work with animal oils. But olive oil is super new, at least here. Now, if you were an herbalist in Italy 300 years ago, sure, you would have been infusing things in olive oil, no problem.
Sure.
But not if you were an herbalist in New England. You would have been working with lard or tallow.
Beaver fat.
Yeah.
Bear fat.
Yeah, bear fat for sure. And, you know, deer tallow, even duck lard, like whatever you had, but it would have been an animal fat. It would not have been a vegetable fat. Yeah. So the only drawback to working with animal fats to make your salve is that it is very difficult to deodorize them. And there's always going to be just a little smell.
Everybody wants to put lavender in there. Like lavender's going to cover it over,
It's
and
not.
you're gonna get some like piggy scented lavender. I mean, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. So you just like, so I think that's why we haven't re-standardized on it commercially, because it smells a little bit nicer to work with olive oil. But actually in terms of quality, honestly, the animal fats do make better better medicine because you absorb them more readily.
Yeah.
You just have to be okay with this, with the smell.
Yeah.
Although if you work with like rendered lard, it's a little better. That is, of all of them, that is the lightest smell.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's still,
All right, well, we're a little over time. I did see some other questions coming through there about the coronavirus, and I saw somebody doing the part of my job that I forgot, because I was going to talk about herbs to bring you into your body, like Bethany, like Damiana. Absolutely, yes, for sure. That can really make a huge difference in a yoga practice or any other kind of movement practice. So maybe we can spend a little time on Thursday and talk about some of those, but in any case, if you didn't...
about the coronavirus, we just uploaded into the immune health course. It's not about corona, although we will, I think we're going to have a discussion with Sam about that and like have a little, like, what would we do in this situation? But there is a really great discussion with Sam Kaufman about hypothetical management of Ebola with herbs.
Yeah.
And the thought process, I really want everybody to listen to that and listen to it a bunch of times and think about the exercise. Like, think about Ebola, because that's fun. But think about the exercise, because there is going to be so much new stuff every year from here on out, because climate change is real and because people move around a lot. And so we need to be good at thinking about new diseases, new infectious diseases, and coming up with herbal strategies for them. And the way to do that, he's laid out really very nicely in that discussion.
Yeah.
So I really want you guys to listen to it.
Yeah, he's got a little write-up about coronavirus.
He does, and we're going to put a recording in there too.
That, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so we can talk about a bit that on Thursday and whatever else comes up to y'all.
Kayla, that discussion is in the immune health course, which is included in the community health program, community herbalist program, or you can get it on its own. Yeah, it's in chapter, I don't know,
Somewhere.
So towards the end, like the third from the end or something like that. Yeah. And also I noticed Barbara and somebody else, Trish, talking about herbalism in later years, and that's really exciting. Catherine wants an infographic on Katya's sliding scale of cake. I think we need to put our heads together and make that happen. Yes.
All right.
And if we missed anybody else here, then please just quickly before you log out, copy your question and hold on to it and toss it right in there at the beginning on Thursday, because we don't want to miss any questions. All right, everybody.
All right.
Have a great night.
See you in a couple days.
Hi, I'm Katya,
And I'm Rin.
and we're here at the Commonwealth Center for Holistic Herbalism in Boston, Massachusetts.
And we're excited to share this replay of this week's live herbal Q&A session with you.
These live sessions are part of our herbal learning program, and you can find out more about that at commonwealthherbs.com/learn.
Check it out. But before we begin, we just wanted to remind you that we are not doctors. We are herbalists, and we're holistic health educators.
The ideas discussed on this video do not constitute medical advice. No state or federal authority licenses herbalists in the United States, so these discussions are for educational purposes only. Everybody's body is different, so the things that we're talking about may or may not apply directly to you, but hopefully they'll give you some more information to think about and to go research more.
We just want to remind you that good health is your own personal responsibility, and that the final decision when considering any course of therapy, whether it's discussed on the internet or prescribed by a physician, is actually always yours.
So don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to send us any questions at info@commonwealthherbs.com, and enjoy the replay.
Thanks for joining us in this replay of our live Q&A session.
If you'd like to learn more about our herbal learning courses and get access to our twice weekly live Q&A sessions so that you can ask us questions directly, then you can check them all out at commonwealthherbs.com/learn.
See you soon.